Have you ever been on a climb and you're halfway through, say, and you fall because you can't figure out the next move? In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to prevent that. One thing that I learned early on in my climbing experience is that once you figure out what moves you need to make, it's a lot easier to finish the climb, and it's even easier to repeat the climb after you've finished all the moves. The reason for this is, one, you figured out the sequencing, also known as beta in the climbing community, and you've also built the confidence to make each move. Now when it comes to confidence, that's a mental training thing. I did make a video on that. Link is in the description. Go ahead and watch it after this video. When it comes to sequencing, however, I'm going to walk you through each step that you need to take to make sure that you are figuring out the sequence the best way possible. And even for those more experienced climbers, you may find that you're actually missing one of these steps. So definitely I recommend reviewing each of these steps every time you're working on your project. Step one is really easy, and that's reviewing all of the holds. So you're going to look at both your handholds and the footholds. I still have problems where I'm not finding all the footholds. I may be on a route, get too tired because I can't figure out my foot, and then when I fall off, I look at what happened, and there was this hidden foothold underneath another route's hold. This happens all the time, and it's not just me. So make sure that you're reviewing all of those footholds and try to commit it to memory. Step two is figuring out what you're going to do with the first move. How are you going to place your hands on the starter holds, your feet, and what is that first move? Are you going up with your left hand? Are you going up with your right? With this movement, you also need to consider your feet, because typically in climbing you move your feet before your hands, but when it comes to starting, your feet should already be in place, saving you a move so you can move your hand first. With that being the case, if you're going up with your left hand, then you should probably have a pretty secure left foot. Of course, there's always those routes that have crummy footing to get started. The next step is to make a plan for the rest of the moves. You're going to visualize yourself making each movement. Where are you placing your hands? And then where are you moving your feet? I prefer starting at the bottom, very first move, and working my way up. A lot of professionals look at the crux, which is the hardest move in the route, and they memorize the crux and then work the rest of the route. Professional climbers, they only have 6 minutes to review the crux, memorize the crux, and then oftentimes they just hope that they can make it through the easier moves so that they can actually implement the beta that they figured out for that crux. So for everybody else that has more than 6 minutes, you don't have to worry about working out the crux first and then working your way down. That being said, I've also heard a lot of people love starting at the end and then working their way backwards. I have tried this, and I'm sure it's great for some people. Unfortunately for me, it is very backwards. You know when you watch something in rewind and it just doesn't look right? That's how reading the beta is for me when I start at the top and try and work my way back down to the bottom. Though it's probably a great way to troubleshoot if you're having any issues with the sequence. Next step is to look at the crux. Now that you've gone through each move, you should know or have a pretty good idea of what's going to be the hardest move. For that hardest move, what are you going to do? Where do your feet need to be? Sometimes I'm not right with where I think the hardest move is. So keep that in mind when you are figuring out the beta and the sequencing. You might not have it right, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't spend additional time on the moves that you think are right. That way you're more likely to accomplish the route on your first try, and you'll at least be able to get it done a few tries less than if you had just tried moves without considering body movement beforehand. Now that you have visualized the starting moves, each move in between, as well as some intense time on the crux, we're going to actually try the route. This is the part that route setters call forerunning, where you're testing the route and figuring out what moves you need to make. And when it comes to route setting, you're figuring out what moves to make, as in where to place holds. As us little climbers, we're figuring out what moves to make based on what the route setters intended. So we're going to do what's called forerunning, and that is actually trying the different moves. If you fall at this point, be sure to review what happened when you fell. Did you lose your footing? Did you just get tired and you need to figure out a different way of doing things? Or maybe you're on a really slippery sloper, so you need to figure out a different way to grip the hold. At this point, I would recommend figuring out what you should do different next time, and either trying the route again, or a pro tip would be trying just that move. So you can use adjacent climbs to get up to that move, and then try that move until you figure out where you need to place your hand or what you need to do with your feet to get to that point. Once you have practiced each move, you've figured out how to do it, it's time to put it together, which is not the final step. The second to final step is putting everything together that you figured out. The last step is to practice this. You've got to practice each step so when it comes to a really difficult project, you aren't forgetting the steps of sequencing. And really, these steps are important if you want to get this in the few amount of tries as possible, which is great if you want to conserve your energy so you can do more routes that day. For example, I know quite a few people who forget that they can climb up to different holds and try that move before they restart it over again. And what happens is they don't have the energy to make and try new moves over and over again at that point because they exhausted themselves getting up there. There are quite a few other mistakes when it comes to sequencing that climbers make, especially beginner climbers. So I actually made a video all about that, and you can view that video in the description. I'll also include a link at the end of the video so you can check that out. I also realized that sometimes I forget these steps, so I made a little printable card, and you can see the link in the description below and click on that and print it out for yourself. It's just a card that reminds you to go through each of these steps. That way, if you're on a really hard project and you can't figure things out, you can look at this list of steps and go, oh yeah, that's what I keep on forgetting that. Okay, let's try that. It's free, obviously, and it's just in the description below.